Hello, folks. Dustin Zarni here, Democratic Elections Commissioner in Onondaga County. Welcome to Commissioner in a Car. Today I'm talking about the enrollment numbers in New York. February 20th, every election is when we, around this time, because it's based on when the primary is, and when the party change deadline is, but February 20th, we take what's called enrollment numbers in New York. That it means that we are populating our different fields, and I'll go into why we do it on February 20th in a little bit. But let's talk about how we got here first. So when I'm talking about enrollment numbers, I'm talking about both active and inactive voters in New York. The New York State Board of Elections takes them from the county boards of elections. We continuously maintain voter registration in New York every day, whether you think there's an election or not. But at certain times, at certain times we have times where we take these numbers because they serve a particular purpose and record them. And the February 20th pull is because these are the numbers that are used to determine the registered voters in a political subdivision and to determine the number of signatures that a candidate will need to get on the ballot successfully during the upcoming designating processes and independent nominating processes. So these figures that are taken, it was taken at midnight this last night, these figures will determine how many signatures you need to get if you are running for office. That is taken by like 5% of whatever, let's say you're running for first council district in the city of Syracuse. You're going to look at the number of Democrats there that are enrolled, take 5% of that, and that's the number of signatures you need to get during the designating petition period, which starts next week, to get on the ballot for that party. Now, independent nominating petitions happen later in April, and we'll talk about that as we get closer to that. These are non-party lines that can get on the ballot. But for the party lines, almost every race, except for a few towns in Onondaga County, will have to walk petitions starting next week. So the enrollment numbers that were taken today are what will populate the field. Now, you may say, well, who cares? Taken today, taken last week, taken during the last election. There has been no real changes, and you would be wrong. Though it may look like that. When we broke, and last collected numbers was November 1st, right before the general election, and there was 319,980 or so voters. I can't remember the exact number. Active registered voters in Onondaga County, and another about 21,000 what we call inactive voters in Onondaga County. The difference between active voters and inactive voters are that active voters, they are properly registered, have submitted the paperwork. We've sent them out mailers, and we have every reason to believe that they are active and in the county. And when they go to a polling place, they can vote regularly using a regular ballot, putting that ballot into the voting machine and having it count automatically that day. Then we have another 21,000, which are called inactive voters. Inactive voters, for many different reasons, but the most common reason are voters that have had a piece of mail returned to the Board of Elections. We send out an annual mailing each year, between April and May, that annual mailer, when we send that out, we get cards back if somebody doesn't live where they are registered to vote. And so instead of being an active voter, they become an inactive voter, and thus they can vote by affidavit at the polling place. The third category of voter is purged. Purged means that they are no longer registered to vote, have no right to vote at the polls, whether via absentee or affidavit or on the machine. So purge voters are people that were dead voters. We scan the obituaries each week, each day, and also counting death records or people who were incarcerated for felonies. They become purged. There's a lot of different things that make him purge, but the most often reason that we purge voters is what happened this last election. If you're an inactive voter and you've been inactive for more than 2 federal elections, you will eventually become purged through a process called the NVRA. I'll talk about a little bit about that in a second. So, as I said, in November, we ended with about 319,980 or so registered voters. Today, we have 319,970, I think, or close to that. It's very close to the number of registered voters. But that doesn't mean that there's been no activity. In fact, there's been a ton of activity. But the biggest activity you might see is that we went from 21,000 inactive voters to about, 15,000 or so inactive voters in Onondaga County. So there are less registered voters, active and inactive, although about the same amount of active voters. So how did we get here? Well, it's important to remember that registration happens every day. Every day we receive notifications from the Department of Motor Vehicles. That's how most people register to vote. We get about once a week what's called a change of address file, which has about 600 or so, on average, people who have moved their addresses around into or inside of Onondaga County. Then we have what's called VAs, the voter registrations that come from the Department of Motor Vehicles. These are people who check the box on their DMV form that they turned in that they absolutely want to register to vote. You may know that New York is an opt-in state as of this moment. Automatic voter registration is coming in where it'll become an opt-out state hopefully later this year. But right now you still have to check your box at the DMV, whether online or a paper form that will say that you want to register to vote or update your registration. So we get about 30 a day of those, 35 a day of those. Really kind of depends on the day. We also get online voter registration. Right now it's not that much. Going into an election, we might get 100 to 200 a day. Especially in a presidential election. Right now, we're getting trickles, like about, probably a couple dozen a week for online voter registration. And, but that'll ramp up. We saw a little bit of a surge right before the party change deadline I talked about a couple weeks last week. But, and then we still get over the counter people registering to vote, agencies at New York agencies, paper forms that we also process. So that's been, daily processing. But the big changes that have affected the voter registration rolls is we had about 5,700 affidavit ballots last November in Onondaga County. All of those were people who, as part of an affidavit ballot, they're inactive voters, or maybe they weren't registered voters at all. And on the affidavit ballot, there is a voter registration form right on the front. So that changes a lot of registrations. A lot of times, most of them are people who just are active registered voters or inactive registered voters that are updating their address. But every now and then, especially on Golden Day, the first day of early voting, we get new voters. And even sometimes we get those new voters not on Golden Day, but those ballots won't count, but we will register them to vote. So that happens. That was the big thing. That happened right after the election. And then we had just a couple weeks ago the NVRA, and that's the National Voter Registration Act. The NVRA process deals with inactive voters who have not voted in 2 federal elections. This happens once every other year, and if they are inactive and had no change, they have not activated their status and have not voted in 2 federal elections, they then get purged. That's how voters eventually drop off the roll. They're active, they become inactive, and then they're purged. That actually took about 10,000 of our inactive voters and purged them, so they are no longer active voters. Then then we had what's called the NCOA, the National Change of Address. We get that every year from the post office. These are addresses that have changed and people that have moved. And we, besides just moving voters around inside of our county, sometimes they move voters outside of our county. There are voters that live inside our county and now have moved to a different county. Those voters go off the active status and go to the inactive status. We notify the counties and states of what we did, and we also send them a letter. One of the reasons we send them a letter is to notify them of this and allow them to make that change as well. So that actually, the end result of that was about 5,000 or 3,000 or so voters moved from the active status to the inactive status. So the net result is we have about the same number of active registered voters as we did last November's elections. And usually we drop quite a bit. So there's been a lot of activity to up our voter registration rolls. So the fact that we're even is actually a very positive sign for activity that is still, people are still registering to vote. But the other thing it did was it dropped our inactive voters. It had about 21,000 inactive voters. I think we're down to 15, 16, something like that right now. That is what's gone on to get to this moment today where we have pulled our enrollment figures for every political subdivision in Onondaga County. Now, the enrollment figures are up at the New York State Board of Elections website today, and tomorrow they'll be up on our website at onvote.net. The New York State Board will have the Senate, Assembly, and county by county voter enrollment for all of New York State. It's a great resource to have. And then we will be putting up ours. We're proofing it today. Wasn't quite ready to go up at 4:30 when we left. So it'll be going up sometime tomorrow. And also sometime tomorrow will be our enrollment, our signature stats, where voters will have to, where candidates will have to get a certain number of signatures if they're running in one of the 4 recognized party lines: Democrat, Conservative, Republican, and Working Families. And I believe we'll be putting up the independent nominating petition numbers as well, either tomorrow or shortly thereafter. And those petitions will start next week on February 25th. So that's a kind of, this is what I kind of like to do with this podcast, vlogcast, whatever it is, videocast, is kind of talk about these activities inside of the boards of elections, because I don't think people realize how much work goes into it. I'm sure they don't, and why would they? They're not there. But I find these things interesting, and it's a way to show just how hard the people at these boards of elections work, but how much care is also put into the process, that we are trying to identify every voter, where they live, and that they're eligible to vote, and also that they stay eligible to vote. So, I probably missed a step or two here or there, going off memory here, but everything is bipartisanly done, bipartisanly reviewed, overviewed by our state board of elections. They've always find a data issue that we have to fix. We work with our vendor. NTS is our voter registration vendor, to make sure that everything is communicating properly. And when you have a voter database of, well, it ends up being around 500,000 voters, but a lot of them are purged and a lot of them are inactive, but about 320,000 active registered voters. There's a lot of moving parts that go to this. So I'm very, we got this enrollment done. The signatures will go up tomorrow. I'm pretty happy with where we are. What I'm not happy with is my podcast schedule. I've just not been as good about doing this on a regular basis. I want to do these on Mondays, and this last Monday was a holiday. The Monday before, I was getting ready to travel. But I really believe this next Monday, I'm going to be back to the Monday schedule. So I'm really hoping that. I also want to kind of add a little segment to these podcasts, because there's always little things going on at the Board of Elections that I don't get to, because they're not enough to talk about for a whole podcast. But so I'm going to try to end every podcast with other things going on at the Board of Elections this week. Just so you can say that, I talk about this a lot, how we have 5 different elections in New York, March elections for villages, June elections for villages, May elections for school boards, June elections for the primary, and then, of course, the big November election. And every election has about 5 to 6 months worth of prep time for it. Well, that means that we're always preparing for an election while running an election. So it's all, these things all overlap. So a few little things that have gone on this week. We have proofed and finished our ballots for our March election. The absentee and vote by mail ballots have either gone out or will be going out in the mail tomorrow for the village elections that we run, which are Skaneateles and Manlius. We got candidacies from them last week. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, there is no competition for these races. They're having elections in Manlius and Skaneateles, and there are no opposition candidates. They're either incumbents or single party candidates that are running without any opposition, though we will still have an election. There is still a write-in option. So things could change over the next month. That election happens March 18th. So those ballots went out. The ballots have been proofed. The machines are starting to be programmed for election day for those 2 villages. There are 2 other villages, Jordan and Fabius, that have elections this year in March, but we don't run those at the Board of Elections. The county clerks do. And I assume that they've sent out their absentee and vote by mail ballots as well. And then we have, what else has been going on at the Board of Elections? Well, we're doing a lot of cross-training because we have a lot of new employees. The Republican side has had a lot of turnover. With the new commissioner come in, by the way, Commissioner Ryan and I get along just fine. We're working through all of this stuff together. I'm very, this will be my 3rd commissioner in my tenure at the Board of Elections, 3rd GOP commissioner. So, every relationship is different, and there are strengths and weaknesses, and we're getting to know each other, and we're working together, I think, pretty well. We are also at the Board of Elections getting prepared for petition season, which starts next week, and we're going to have a lot of training because we have so many new people, and our voter registration system is still pretty new to us. The NTS system we brought in August of last year, so We had a crash course in it to get through the presidential election, but now we're getting some training next week. So these are the things that we're doing at the Board of Elections that I don't think I'd devote a whole podcast to, but there we are. So I'm hoping still to finish up my look at the November election and do the election day vote. I got all the stats together. I just haven't been able to write the narrative, and I'm hoping that this weekend I'll have some time to do that. My podcast next week, which I hope will be on Monday, we'll be talking about party designations and the beginning of the petition season. So designations and petitions will be next week's topic. I'm going to save that to next week because the Republicans are announcing candidates right now, and Democrats will be announcing candidates on Sundays. And we'll talk about what that means, what it doesn't mean, and why every candidate still needs to go out and get petitions to be on the ballot. And we'll talk about that next week. That's all I got right now. Thank you very much for tuning in to Commissioner Carr, and enjoy your week. Remember to subscribe. You can go to DustinZarni.com and subscribe and get posts that have all of my content and as well as election news. And of course, you can find this podcast on Spotify, Facebook, Twitter. I'm on all of those. You can follow me there and get as much information as possible. Thank you again, and enjoy your day. Bye-bye.